Hello and welcome to the Strength and Flexibility Summit, hosted by Nirvana Strength. I am Ian Macleod, co-host and co-founder of Nirvana Strength. On this particular interview, we have Udi Marmerstein. He is a professional acrobat based out of Las Vegas, Nevada. He's mainly self-taught and performs on a professional level and teaches all over the world. Hopefully, we'll be teaching quite a lot in 2021 after all this kind of mess clears up. You may also know him as the ginger bearded physical cultural enthusiast. You've probably seen a lot of his videos doing some amazing acrobatic feats, or even just like swinging a rope around. But that if you have seen him, you can definitely not. You'll definitely know from his big ginger beard. So everybody say hi and welcome to Udi Marmerstein. How you doing, brother?
Yeah, yeah, not too bad. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. And I think one thing that is a very we'll delve deeper into it is obviously your experiences in your fitness journey through your practice, and also like all the different kind of like training modalities that you kind of incorporate in what you do. You have a very unique perspective and approach that you don't really see too many places. So to kind of get started, with regards to your training, in looking at like your bio, like I know that you started back when you were younger, around 16, 17 years old. How would you characterize your training and and what you do at that point versus how it's progressed to now? I know it's kind of a lot of time, obviously, to cover, but a lot of time, not saying that you're like old, but you're very experienced. You're experienced.
It's always been the word that I'll use, and I'm glad that I'm thinking about this now. Is it's always been an exploration to some degree. There have been moments that I've been very focused on one particular skill set, but it's always been about exploring. In the beginning, it was like completely uncharted territory. I had no idea what I was doing, and there wasn't a lot of material to or teachers available to help me with that. So in the beginning, it was just kind of this raw exploration of like, where am I? What is this world around me of stuff that I can do? And it progressed to doing a number of different things. So I started just kind of basic backyard martial arts without much, training or instruction, learning from movies and stuff like that. I continued to doing capoeira. I continued to getting into gymnastics type training, got into college cheerleading, got into MMA and other kind of martial arts, got into weightlifting and strongman type stuff. uh Continued with that, got into like stunts and fight choreography, got into dance, got into circus, acrobatics. So a lot of different stuff in there, but it's always been, and it still is, and I think that's something I never want to lose, is this idea of you always exploring. It's always an exploration, and it's like if you know a territory really well, you should go to another territory, because then you're not really exploring a territory that you know well. I mean, you can get into the details, you can map every inch of the fjords and get to know all of the details of the territories you do know, but that's something that I'm always trying to continue to do, is just exploring either something new, or something I don't know. I don't know if that was the question, but I've done a number of different stuff. Different things have held my interest for different times. Some things I did because I thought they were cool. Some things I did because I was interested in some of the deeper aspects. Some of it was more on the surface, like I want to learn the handstands and shit so I can talk to girls. Didn't work, but I learned a lot of handstands, right? And different skills are going to require different focuses as well, like handstand, because a lot of people know me for that. And I spent a very long time really obsessing over the handstand training. And that is one particular skill that it's very demanding. There's a lot of skills that you can train once a week and make consistent progress, and handstand is very needy, so it's like you kind of have to obsess with it. But the whole point of everything, of all of the stuff that I've done and all of the stuff the listeners are doing, is everything you learn is an opportunity to learn more about yourself. So you're learning something new, but you're constantly refining your own process of learning something. And that's something, it's really easy So it's really interesting coming to learn this now because I'm learning a bunch of new stuff. And what I'm finding is that I'm learning things that are completely new to me a lot faster than than it took me to learn the stuff that I've been doing for a long time initially. But also I learn new things faster than I can fix the stuff that I've been doing because it's so ingrained. So I think, yeah, if I had to put one word, exploration, always explore, get too caught up in your path. Don't get too caught up in walking the path. If you see a tangent that looks like it's a good trail, it's going to lead to a cool view, you should follow that. If it doesn't go anywhere, then you follow it and you know it doesn't go anywhere. And it's what you can add to your own experience. And especially now, I think one of those, I'm rambling a bit too far on tangents. I just got up from a long nap, but the point is, there's a lot of information out there now. So the information is no longer unique. There's a point that people that had the information were unique because the information wasn't widely available. Now the information is widely available. So what's unique is the perspective you can put behind the information you deliver. And how do you gain perspective? You walk the path and you go to those tangents and you're leading people on this path. They say, don't go there. I went there and it's shit. It's a dead end. And if you only looked at the map, you don't know that. You have to walk the path to know that. And the perspective is what's unique now and what's valuable and where the true value is. Because if you want to learn information, University of YouTube, I have many degrees.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a lot of really, really good points, and it's something that we'll definitely come and revisit. That last point with regards to, and I think, like I talked with Miguel Santana, and one thing he was talking about how everything nowadays is like let's say if you're driving from one town to the next, like how do you get there? You just follow the GPS, you follow some system or some program that is deemed like good, and then you get to your destination, but you have no clue about all these other possible tangents that could have been like even more amazing than the actual destination that
Yeah.
you
Not
received.
only that, you don't have a problem solving solution. What if an exit was blocked? And then all of a sudden your phone dies and you're screwed, right?
Yeah,
What if your phone died and then you learn to rely on the tool instead of the problem solving skills? And that's what, like, even if you don't get necessarily at a high level of all the stuff you're doing, it's about learning these real-time problem solving skills that start to become missing because of convenience, because one person solved the problem, they franchised how they solved the problem, helped a lot of people solve that problem, but did it actually help them? Because now they're not good at solving problems.
yeah, and I think we'll talk a little bit about this with regards to like the systematic approach of how the majority of people kind of go versus actually learning how to learn and imply and incorporate like critical thinking in the process.
Yep.
Kind of go back to everything that you've done, like just like listening all this stuff, and there is this perspective of like being a generalist or being a specialist, like in a particular field. Like, what is your general perspective of that?
I think you should do what interests you. And I can't tell you that because everybody is different. So I think both are good. I think it's good to have the capacity to be adaptable, meaning that you've done enough different stuff that if somebody throws something at you by surprise, you're not caught by surprise because you've done something similar because you know how to move and adapt with that. So that this idea of adaptability, that's something that generalism builds really well because you learn a lot of different stuff. There's some carryover. Some of it is pretty unique to the skill itself, but by learning these different skills, you kind of cast a wider net. And just in case you get surprised by something, and I think that's good because I've been doing a lot of stuff recently where it is that it's like you have to bullshit and improvise your way out sometimes, and you have to get a wide perspective to know that if you can only do one thing, if your only tool is a hammer, and all of a sudden everything is soft and you get thrown that you can't hammer things anymore. So there's that, but then it's easy to take it too far. So some people, I'm going to give, this is kind of how I think, is I have my own perspective, but it's a multiple perspective and just trying to see it in both sides. So generalism is amazing because you learn versatility. But what ends up happening is a lot of people use that as an excuse to not really get that good at any one thing, right? So some people can say, you can say like, let's say I'm doing, I don't know, some shit and I get called out on my technique and I say, well, I'm a generalist. I can do this other stuff. So of course I'm not that good at it. So is that a cop out? Is that something that you would use as an excuse to actually not take something that far? So I think it is. I think it's good to do a number of different things. I think this is a general kind of philosophy, I think, for life and for health. It's good to take one thing far. It's good to understand that part of the learning process, to get way past the beginner gains, to hit a few plateaus and know how to go by them, because a lot of people don't learn that when they just kind of randomly taste, right? You got the sampler course, you taste all these different foods, they're all delicious, but going far enough to be able to cook like one good meal that you know the details of, that's something to stand for itself as well. So I think it's good. Pick one thing you enjoy. You have to enjoy it. Otherwise, you're not going to get that far in something that you don't legitimately care or are interested in. But it's good to have one thing that you take past those beginner gains, that you take to a level where you've gotten to the, I don't know, let's say the 5%. You can get to the 5% in something. Anyone can get to the 5%. The like the 1%, that's going to be a combination of genetics and specificity and all this other stuff. Let's say that to the 5 or 10th percentile of at least one thing, you should be able to take far enough, because that's a learning process in itself. And if you only do the generalist stuff or you just bank on those beginner gains, there's a lot left to desire that you haven't learned yet. And what ends up getting more interesting is that if you do that, you become even more of a specialist. Your actual percentile gets a lot smaller, because let's say, like I'm paraphrasing an article from Scott Adams, who wrote the Dilbert comic strip.
Okay.
And I remember it was a really interesting thought process. You can apply this to a lot. Whoever you are, you're probably not good enough to be in the 1% of anything. This is just statistics. Whether you're an athlete or you're a tradesman or whatever, this is like reserved for the people who have the talent and put in the work at a very specific time frame, right? And one thing, however, if you can mesh multiple things together, and what Scott Adams was saying about himself is he wasn't a very good artist, he wasn't a very good comedian. However, he was mediocre at both, and he was able to get a really successful comic strip about people working in an office because he was a mediocre artist and a mediocre comedian who had the perspective of working in an office. And because of that, he was able to create a very specific niche by not being in the 1% of anything. But once you start adding those together, you create the 1%. So that's why I think it's good. It's good to be able to do one thing really well, but do a bunch of different stuff. And then that's true versatility. And that's what makes you and your skill set really unique.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I mean, if there was definitely one word to describe like your practice is very unique. And I think, you hit on a really good point with regards to like, what is the intention behind what it is you're trying to do? If you are wanting to be, a quote unquote, a generalist, are you approaching it from a perspective that you're being very intentional with how your approach is, or are you using it as a means to just cop out of working
Absolutely.
on proper
And
technique?
then, so here's the other thing. If you're a true generalist, you're going to do shit that you don't like, because if you only do the stuff you like, that's another cop out,
Yeah,
right? To a certain degree, if you're really specific and really strict on that mindset, you're going to do stuff that you don't like, and it doesn't matter because you're learning a new skill set.
right. And so if we think about and shifting this towards this idea of strength and flexibility, and what the mass, I guess, approach is towards strength and flexibility, it almost seems like they have become, or people perceive them as separate things, as independent of each other. What is your perspective of strength and flexibility as how you see other people perceive it, but then how do you perceive it from your side?
I think there are different manifestations of flexibility, and the way I teach it, I actually did an online workshop on this pretty recently, is I have four main, it's generalized, but four main manifestations of flexibility, and two of them involve strength to some degree. So there is an overlap, there is a carryover. A lot of people think of flexibility as relaxed So I'm going to go into those four categories. So I would do relaxed flexibility, resisted flexibility, active flexibility, and dynamic flexibility. So those are four main expressions. So relaxed flexibility would be no movement, letting gravity do the work, trying to, I hate to use the word in the definition, but trying to relax. I don't like the word passive flexibility because you're still doing stuff in the active flexibility. You're actively trying to relax. It's not a passive thing. Then you have resisted flexibility where you're in the stretch, whatever position that may be, and you're pushing against it. Then active would be your, I hate using the word in the definition, you're trying to go further in the stretch by your own means. And then dynamic would involve speed, which involves a different kind of stretch response. I don't know the name of it, but there's the stretch reflex turns off in a very specific way when there's speed involved, and that's its own kind of flexibility. And so the active and the resisted flexibility are strength elements within the position. But people think that it's a very, the mindset is very narrow where they think of strength, okay, you're doing squats and presses and pull-ups, and flexibility, okay, you're doing, lunges and bridges and whatever. But the reality is they're all just expressions of what the human body can do. And it's not, ultimately, they're more similar. Everything is more similar than it's all connected. And you'll find, right, people who are naturally good at expressing strength are not as naturally good at expressing flexibility, and vice versa. But in combining the two, we build that versatility that we talked about. And that's kind of my ideal, is you have the ability to express all of these ranges of motion of your body, and you can express them in a relaxed manner. You can push against it. If someone were to put force on you in that position, you still have the manner to resist it. In that position, you have the manner to go further. And then speed is a different category. But like when I teach flexibility, the main word that I use is comfort, is getting comfortable in these positions, because we'll talk about it more. I'm sure we'll get into it as a psychology of flexibility, which is something a lot of people don't talk about, because you're not really stretching them. You're stretching the muscle, but it's not getting longer. You stretch it and then it comes back. It doesn't get longer over time. It's about manipulating your brain's limiters of what it thinks your body can safely do. So this idea of building comfort, and my idea of comfort is not just to sit in the position, it's to be able to overcome the danger. So getting out safely, getting in it. And in that sense, you're applying strength.
And I think you definitely hit on a lot of points, and you can kind of work on the psychological component by focusing on these four different areas that you're talking about. And I think the psychological component is real, because I mean, let's say you take a bigger guy and they're just not flexible to any degree, and you push them to their end range, and you just see like the facial expressions that come from doing something like that. It is like learning to, and I think comfort is a great word, like trying to build a level of comfort in all the movements that you're trying to do.
And comfort doesn't mean that you're going to be, eventually you can relax in it, but that might not be for a while. And it's interesting, just to draw parallels. I took this, the Wim Hof workshop a while ago, a couple of years ago, but they talked about this idea of you get in the ice bath and it shocks you and you're in like panic, shit, I need to get out. But if you breathe and relax, you can tell yourself, no, it's not that bad. I can stay in it for a while. And in those deep stretches, like you said, when you go towards the end range, it's actually very similar response in the body, where it's shock, it's panic, it's dangerous, I need to get out. But if you breathe, you don't have to get out, you can stay there. And it's a very similar idea of how you can manipulate your own psychology and mindset towards increasing that attribute.
Yeah, that's great. I like that analogy. So if you were to do a similar spiel about strength, how would you characterize that?
Strength is, it's going to be a combination. I would say strength is more physical than flexibility training, because you're not, Most of the strength that you do, maximal strength, you're not in dangerous positions, but you are, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. So the strength is also psychological, because realistically it's a function of your nervous system. So there is kind of a danger involved when you get into that heavy weight that you have to turn on. Some people can turn it on much better than others. But strength, to me, it's more physical adaptation. It's a psychological adaptation towards being able to handle load, and there's a confidence that comes with that. But to me, I don't separate the strength and flexibility as much as I separate strength and technique. And I think of strength as putting a stimulus on the body to initiate an adaptation response within the body. But there is a psychological component to that as well. But most people, when they train strength, aren't going to hit that psychological component unless you're getting, lifters who are hitting their 1 rep maxes, and that's where it gets a lot more psychological. I think strength is less psychological than that, but it depends on how you think of it, I guess.
Yeah, and I think
To me, it is. Unless you're working maximal, unless you know that you're lifting a load that you're not sure that you can lift, and there is that doubt, and you have to overcome that, and that's going to be, power lifters, Olympic lifters hitting that 1 rep max, where there is a psychological barrier they have to overcome.
yeah, and I think that's an important aspect of strength training that you talk about, that a lot of people don't think about that psychological component. Particularly like, I mean, an easy example would be like lifting an incredibly heavy weight in the comfort of your own environment versus trying to compete on a stage, right? And not being able to hit anywhere close to your typical numbers.
Yeah.
I think
Isn't that why the Thor and Eddie are having a feud right now? Because he broke the record like in his own personal gym or something like that?
yeah, I mean, definitely it plays a bigger part in the strength and flexibility, like training, or I mean, in any training.
No, and environment is important. There's energy in environment and the people around you. And I think even reading in Juji Mufu's book, he was saying like, if you look at a gymnastics gym, a circus gym, divers, people who stretch a lot and are known to be very flexible, it's a very casual thing. It's like, they're checking their emails while in the oversplits, and that's a normal thing. And it's normalizing that environment is a big part of it as well. And same thing walking into a gym with a lot of, big lifters, like you feel that energy, and you're going to lift maybe more that day because you feel that energy in the room from those other people. And the environment is a huge factor. Actually, when I was coaching gymnastics, really interesting how environment affected flexibility. One is what the kids would do at home, but sometimes it's really interesting. You could put a kid into a higher level class, and they would instantly get more flexible because they see that it's more normal, to have their splits.
And I think I mean, it goes along with even the concept of like, you being equal to the 5 people that you surround yourself with, or the average of the people that you surround yourself with. And I think that's the environment in which you train. And I think that's something that people kind of miss out. They're like, oh, I can just go to this gym and I can just get it for, whatever price. And then, but, so you've been to Nirvana, and I'm sure you've been to a lot of other gyms where the idea of what's normal is significantly higher than what the typical person perceives it to be normal.
It's super important, because what happens, like you're working on whatever, let's say you're working on your splits, right? But it's a normal thing to do in gymnastics gyms or gyms that train that. And then you go to the Globo gym, whatever, Planet Fitness or whatever shit, you're going to get some weird looks. And then how is that, even if you don't care, even if you legitimately don't care and are working on your own shit, it's still, I don't want to get too hippie-ish, it's still kind of negative energy directed towards you. And even if you legitimately don't care, you're noticing it, and there's going to be some amount of doubt, right? It's the same thing. Like I went through that a lot because I was training handstands in the, just like a regular gym, and I was the weird dude doing handstands, and I still made progress. But how different it became when I moved to Vegas and I was training handstands in a room with other handstand people who were all much better than me. That was a very different environment. And I'll say I made a lot more progress when I was training in that environment, even though it's not like we were training with each other. We were just in the same room, all doing our own shit. But just that environment was enough to make more progress because you could watch each other. You
Yeah.
got that energy of people around who are doing the same thing.
And I think this, I think, going down this kind of rabbit hole of talking about your psychology behind it, the environment, how much of effect that has on it, the relationships you have with the people around you, and actually how these things can actually massively influence your flexibility gains, your strength gains, your skill gains.
And people forget some, like the mental state, it's all connected. It's not like it's not like you have the what you do in the training session and that's separate from the rest of your life. That it's all connected in all effects. You had a shitty day at work, you had a shitty day at home, you didn't sleep. That's all of these life factors are going to affect what you do in the gym and vice versa. So there's definitely kind of a cascading process as well. And I think it's easy to forget that. It's easy to forget that lifestyle factors are huge. Because I mean, thinking about it this way as well, in regards to flexibility, let's say you train for 1 hour a day, but then you work in an office for 10 hours a day. Well, what if you modified your lifestyle choices to facilitate the training? And that's powerful because that's passive. Those are passive gains. That's like in the financial world, that's like the interest you collect, right? You make money off your money.
Yeah. So
Lifestyle
when
choices.
you think about like these psychological gains, like how would you characterize the difference between, let's say, learning acrobatics as an adult versus as a child, or just someone who's younger?
As a child, if you have legitimate interest and a good teacher, you are in a very good place. If you have legitimate interest, you can still learn a lot. If you have a shitty teacher, it might get you hurt. You might be able to still get somewhere depending on the statistics. So the main difference as a child is that you don't have to. Children are naturally hardwired to learn. Even if they don't want to learn, even if they don't care, even if they don't understand it, they can still learn a thing.
Yeah.
So it's an advantage and a disadvantage because that ends up making them actually shitty teachers because the learning process they went through bypassed the conscious learning phase a lot of the time, right? And I dealt with this a lot in coaching gymnastics. A lot of the kids are kind of trained to be soldiers, like follow the coach. Well, sometimes the coaches make really shitty decisions, right? So sometimes, like, I wanted my kids to question because you're following the coach who is I'm not trying to talk shit. You're following this coach who's 50 pounds overweight and hasn't done a cartwheel in 10 years. Like, maybe they know what they're talking about, but sometimes you have to kind of discern and make your own decisions because this idea of just following the authority figure, I'm getting political now, is not always the best plan of action because they may not know what's best for you. And that's something that you have to know. But kids are generally trained in these athletic realms not to think for themselves. They're trained more to follow, which also does make sense because as a child athlete, the questioning leads to a longer pathway and they won't get better as fast. And if you have a good coach and a good child athlete and they don't question it, those are the Olympic hopefuls. They don't question it. But that's when you have a talented athlete and good coaching combined, which is not super common to see. And kids, obviously, they have the benefit of time, so they don't have to go to their job. If they're interested in something, they'll put in the reps,
Yeah.
right? Because they have pretty much unlimited energy and pretty much invincibility. Not invincibility, but when their bodies are still growing, they can recover from almost any injury 100%
Yeah.
without any ramifications. Once they hit about 11, 12, then if it's a more serious injury, it's going to have some kind of permanent effects, some physical and mental scarring, which sometimes can last for many years. So they have the time to learn it. If they have the interest, if you teach a kid a cartwheel and they like the way it feels, they're going to do cartwheels for the next 3 hours. They don't know their limitations. So that's the other thing, right? Not only no fear, but they don't know because they're still learning about the world. They don't know what the limitations are. So they're not going to question themselves. Whereas once adults get past a certain age, they think they know about the world. I go into this in my own process as well. They think they know, and then they limit themselves because, oh no, that's not possible. Maybe it's not, but the kid would have tried it. And the kid would have tried it and possibly created something new. But there is a downside to that, of course, because I think the last part of the brain that develops in adults happens around 25, and that's the risk and consequence assessment part of the brain. So to a degree, it can lead to some serious shit if you don't assess your risk properly. But adults, the difference is that the fear, their bodies are heavier, more prone to injury, but adults are not going to be able to bypass the conscious learning phase for the most part. In very rare instances, yes. So adults need a better teacher, a better learning process, more precise learning process, more incremental steps. Like they're not going to be able to go from 0 to 60 without going through all the gears, whereas a kid might be able, maybe they can skip third gear if they go fast enough to get to fifth gear. And with that psychological process, adults have to generally, I'm generalizing, understand something consciously before they can really learn it.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a lot of really good points, particularly like with regards to that conscious learning process, and that's kind of one of the big things that, with regards to certain individuals, like dogmatic approach to their systems or what they do or their way of thinking, it is that they're almost trying to recruit essentially like adults who don't want to actually participate in their own learning process. They just want to just follow a random guy, right? And I'm sure like
they want followers instead of students, yeah, to a degree. And a student should question, and you should, if you're not sure about it, you should, in a respectful way, if they're your teacher, of course, don't be a dick about it. But I always tell students as well, like, question something.
yeah.
And that's what I was telling the kids too. If like, ask why. And if your teacher can't give you a good reason why they're doing something, I don't know. That's not, to me, that's a suspicious sign. That's not a good sign. That means they're not in command of their process. That means their process is somebody else's. And there's a certain point at which it developed gaps and holes that they can't explain. So it's just a good, like, you don't have to agree with it. It doesn't have to be like that, but I think a good teacher, you should be able to explain why you do what you do. There are going to be other methods. Doesn't have to be right or wrong. It doesn't have to be something you agree with, but just logical and clarity.
And I think there's like three things there that you kind of hit on, right? With one, ideally whoever your coach or your trainer is, like, you'd want them to some degree actually do the things or live the part to some extent, like, not for, the example you gave was like not having a super fat or obese trainer trying to show you how to lose weight. Two, obviously, like, producing results is incredibly important, right? But obviously the last part, that part where they're able to actually explain, to some extent in a logical way, like how they go about their process or how they get their results, because you can easily produce like 1,000 successful, stories if you have, 10,000 clients, but is that really a good success rate to follow?
There's a lot of murky logic behind that too, right? Or let's say, like, for example, you get someone who's already a high level athlete and then they learn your system fast because they've already learned a lot of systems. And then you can say, look, here's my poster child, but where did they come from? Right? Isn't that, I think that's how with like Rich Froning and CrossFit or something like that. I remember hearing, like, in 2 years, he won the CrossFit games after 2 years of doing CrossFit, but he was a professional athlete before that. So it's not like CrossFit transformed him. It's like he was already a monster and he learned a new system and adapted to it. I think with there's a level of, you don't want to go too far in any extremes as well with any of that. So like the obese trainer, you want a trainer who's doing the stuff, but at the same time, you probably don't want someone who is the highest level. And I'm saying that because they put all their attention into themselves. If someone is a top level athlete, where are they putting their attention? You can't put your attention everywhere, right? Not all the time. It's just something to consider, because a lot of people, and again, it's not a bad thing, because you should, and if you're training high level athletes, you should understand that level. But being at that level means that's what you're putting your attention into, and not necessarily your students. And who knows, maybe the obese personal trainer just literally doesn't have time to train because they put everything they have into their students. I don't know, but that's where the results and the process come in as well. Like, I'm taking acting classes right now, and the guy who's teaching the classes, he's not an actor, he's a director, but it's a different perspective. But it's an interesting thought is that he gave the speech as well. Like, I'm not competing with you. I legitimately want you to do better because I'm not doing what you are.
Mm.
So it's another interesting thought. There's no right or wrong thought process, just another perspective to think about.
And for sure, I mean, I think, even if, like, let's say you were a systems-based coach, and there's nothing inherently wrong with being that, I think if combined with the ability to recognize the type of athlete that would fit that system the best, and then being able, it's no different than being in a particular niche market with, let's say I'm working specifically with, overweight former athletes who want to get flexible, like I am identifying a certain niche market that I want to work with, and that what I do helps those people the best. I think the problem with the systematic approach, it tends to come when, like, you don't have that filtering process of who you take on as clients. You just take on everybody, and if someone fails, you're just like, oh, that's your fault, not mine.
Yep. And you have to be able to change the system, which is hard if you're doing it on a large scale,
Yeah.
because then you say, oh, this system is meant for everybody. Well, maybe a lot of people are going to get stuff from doing the system. But generally what I say is if you don't know, if you're fresh, if this is the first time on the train, yeah, follow a trail because you don't know where you're going. And if there's already a trail, okay. But if you only follow the same trail and that's all you know how to do, you're not really enjoying the train. So it's good to follow a system to a certain point. If it keeps working, keep doing it by all means. If there's a point that it doesn't work, either you as a student or the teacher should be able to modify that system based on the individual. And that's something that takes problem solving skills. And that's something, if you've created a system, you probably have. If you've just studied the system, did a weekend certification, you probably don't have those problem solving skills to change it unless you've already done something else for a long enough time to have those
Right.
skills.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, for those that are listening and it's like, oh, what does this have to do with strength and flexibility? It's like, well, it has quite a lot, like what kind of program are you following? Like, who you're following, what kind of results you want, what kind of environment you're putting yourself in. Like, all these are incredibly important factors, especially when you're deciding on who you're going to choose to help you in your path. And so kind of going, back into, let's say, just more strength and flexibility training. What is your approach nowadays? How do you decide, like, what is your particular, like, protocols for any particular cycle in your life? And how do you know, what to train really?
This is in my own training.
Yeah, in yourself. You can even talk a little bit about how
Yep.
how you would go about programming for other people as well.
For sure, for sure. So for myself, I'm currently more or less, I'm not pushing those attributes. For what I do, I'm generally flexible and strong enough. So it's more an issue of technique, which means I'm not trying to actively get stronger, but I do want to maintain it. I want to maintain the muscle mass. I want to maintain the strength. I don't want to lose it, but my particular goal involves different skill sets. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. So in terms of flexibility work, I'm doing maybe one session every once in a while of like actual deep stretching. And then just kind of general limbering throughout the day. Strength, I'm doing maybe a couple times a week. Again, it's not, and I'm doing different stuff, different body weight, weights, different, object manipulation, stuff like that. Just stuff to get a good pump, to keep me interested. And again, this is a really important thing to understand as well, is what are you trying to do and how much of that do you need? Because a lot of people are going to say, like, I'm going to use capoeira as an example because it involves a lot of kicks. And a lot of people are going to say, oh, I should get flexible before I start it. Well, why don't you start it and then get flexible as you go, because you're developing the technique and the attribute. And just having the flexibility doesn't mean you're going to learn the technique.
Yeah.
It just means you have a potential to learn a better technique if you did it right, but you still have to do it. So that's really important, is how much strength, like, first of all, what are your goals? What are you trying to do? Being honest with yourself. How much time do you have? And then how much do you actually need? Like most people in their lives, they don't need to do the splits, right? Unless you're a gymnast or circus artist or contortionist or dancer who actually use the splits in their sport, you probably don't need it. So then why are you doing it? Because it looks cool. That's a good reason. And any reason is because the girls will like
Yeah,
me for
yeah,
it. That's a good reason too. The good reason is the one where you're honest with yourself, because I want to take photos on social media and get likes. That maybe it's not the most noble reason, but don't lie to yourself. Oh, I want to explore all there is to know about the human body. And Socrates said that you should know thyself or some shit. Don't spout some bullshit if you don't mean it. Be honest. Like, I want to take pretty photos on social media. That's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. It's that idea of self-honesty. And it took me a long time to really figure out how to be honest with myself as well, because we all have those narratives, right? So that would be the question is, what do you want to do? What are your goals? How much time do you have to achieve them? Some goals take a lot of time. If you're trying to get a one-arm handstand, which is going to involve flexibility and strength to a certain degree and a lot of technique, and you're not willing to train 5 days a week, like, well, it's unlikely you're going to get very far with that. Some things you can do, but what do you want to do? And then do you actually need it? So like I said, most people don't need the splits in their life, but having some kind of hip mobility is going to increase the quality of life up to a certain point, at which point you're doing more than you need to. So I'm trying to take all these factors into consideration,
yeah.
right? And just getting people to understand, like, what is the actual purpose of your goals. And if you just want to learn cool shit, that's fine. That's kind of what got me started. I think a little bit differently now, but that's a fine reason. And then next we have to look at the learning style and body type. And that's something for me is very difficult to explain in words. You have to look at what people's strengths and weaknesses are, what they need to work on. And then the third one for me is, this is something I can't explain, it's just experience, how you're going to actually explain the thing to them. Like when I do the online coaching, I give people a very detailed write-up, and I write that from scratch for every person, because after talking with them, I get an idea of their learning style and how it would be best for me to explain it. Some people are super technical and like that. Some people are a little bit more spiritual, right? So you're giving different cues for different people in a way that they can understand better. So you're kind of changing the dialect. And then in terms of strength and flexibility specifically, what I would be looking at is if they're naturally loose or naturally tight. It's a super generalization, and somebody might be naturally loose in certain areas and naturally tight in other areas. But typically, somebody who's naturally tight is going to need higher loads, right? They might do the same stretches, but they need more force to actually get into the stretch,
Right.
depending on the person. Whereas somebody who's naturally loose, you don't want to just push them down, but somebody who's not going to budge, sometimes you have to put a bit of elbow grease on it. And then somebody who's naturally loose is going to actually want to work more of the strength, but you have to be careful with ramping up the load to a point that it's safe for them, because usually someone who's naturally good at the relaxed flexibility has a lot of trouble expressing the strength in those. So and eventually you bridge the gap between the two. You help the strong people to relax, and then you help the loose people to get tight, and they're actually both getting more flexible in the process, but following a very different path. So for me, it's very individualized. And if I'm not doing it from an individual perspective, if I'm trying to explain something to a large group of people who all have different backgrounds and abilities, I would try to give several perspectives so they can hopefully figure out which one they are.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, you definitely hit on a lot of points with regards to, like, let's say just basic programming, and maybe inherently, like, what's kind of the problem with, obviously, like, free templates that are available, or free programs that people put out, is like, they are not in any way really specific to you as an individual, even among all the different points that you hit on, right?
And you can, the best thing you can do if you're doing a template like that, obviously, like, you want to be able to reach more people from a financial standpoint, of course, as well, is you have to give the perspectives, right? Because then what's going to happen is, and I get this to some degree, and I try my best to shut it down and just offer different perspectives on how to think about it. Like, right, the standard YouTube video, oh, how I got the splits.
Yeah.
How I got the splits, you still could learn something from that. There's still a learning value,
Mhm.
but how I got the splits, it's highly unlikely that that's how you're going to get the splits. It might be, or maybe you might find one exercise in there that you can use, but what it should come down to is the individual is responsible for their own learning process.
Yeah.
And then you do your own Jeet Kune Do Bruce Lee method, where you say, that's a cool method. I'm going to take this thing from that because I think it would work for me. And I'm going to take this thing from something else.
Yeah.
And then I have my way of getting the splits, which is not going to be somebody else's way.
Yeah, and I think that's, it's important to like put that emphasis that the individual needs to be or needs to play an active role in their own development in their own process. Because even from a coach's perspective too, if there's a lack of communication between you and the client, then it's obviously difficult for you to know as a coach which things may be working better than others, until maybe it's even too late, right? They might even incur an injury at that point. So there is, but I think from a coach's perspective as well, like you have to do what you say you do is like, you have to encourage the client to question. You have to actually encourage them to, think of things from a critical perspective.
Yeah,
So
and finding that reason why, I think a good, like the reality is sometimes clients, they're a little bit shy to question, like, I don't want to bother you. A good question, and I've had to go through numerous Instagram lives to figure out why people's questions annoyed me so much. Like people would say, "Oh, guys, ask me questions. I'd love to answer." No, that's a terrible question. I'm not answering that. I had to go through so many of those to figure out a good question everybody's going to learn from. Both parties learn. So it's this idea, what's a bad question? Oh, how do I do this? Do you have any tips? So that's like taking, right? You're not giving. A good question is going into detail, like, I noticed that when you do this, your feet are turned this way. Is there any reason you do that, or is it specific? So that the good questions that I really like are the ones where somebody did the research, they found a specific area where there was a gap within the logic, and then the teacher would clarify it, and then both people learn. Now both people and people listening, so three parties have learned something from that question and answer. Whereas, oh, do you have any tips how to do a press handstand?
it does seem like
Wow.
too, like that with that logic, right? Like the question is more related to the actual like process of
Yeah. And
the
the good questions come from a place of having done it, having done the research, like a certain amount of wisdom. I tried this, I failed, I tried it a different way, I failed again. Based on these failures and this data, what can I do? And that's a real question because that's coming from somewhere. It's coming from a place of action.
Mm,
Really, really important point to note as well, because especially like we mentioned, in the age of information is free. Memorization, that shit is easy, man. I got through college memorizing shit because I can hear something and recite it later. That's not a problem. But to actually understand why and the process behind it, you have to do it, and that takes time. Learning information and reciting it, that doesn't take a long time. That's easy. That's the easy part. It's that perspective behind the information, and the perspective comes from doing and failing, or doing and succeeding, and then you go back and reverse engineer, why did I succeed?
yeah.
And that's like I even got a few questions like that recently enhanced, and it was again just like a general email, like, what can I do to get this better? Well, without seeing you do it, the best thing I can say if you're inconsistent is ask yourself, why did I fail? Why did I succeed? If I failed, what can I do to prevent that next time? What can I do differently? If I succeeded, what was it that caused my success, and how can I repeat that? And
Yeah.
then that's your own process,
Yeah, and
and
I
that's
think,
valuable.
I mean, that's definitely something. I mean, obviously, it's coming out. I think anybody listening to this can easily see like the thought process that goes through almost every single aspect of strength training, flexibility, your programming. All the different external factors that have an effect on the process as well. But and I think it's important to let people know that when you're super beginner, you're like, you just don't know anything. And you talked about just, you may start with a program that the the general populace
Yeah.
would do.
When you're a super beginner, the best thing to do is to do something.
Yeah.
Simple as that, because whatever it is, you'll probably get something from it, even if it's the worst program, and done by a weekend certified whatever 6 weeks marketing guru who decided that they were going to do that particular course on that particular month. If you're a complete beginner, you're still going to get something from that. However, if you do want to take things further to a high level, but as a beginner, you don't have the eyes yet, you don't know yet. Like it all looks the same. The good information that's thoughtfully crafted versus the shit that's regurgitated and spewed upon the ground. You're not going to know that yet as a beginner. Eventually, you're going to know. But here's the thing, and this is again another lesson that I found working in these gymnastics gyms. So what would happen, right? Typically, the more advanced coaches, the better coaches would work with the better athletes, and the more novice coaches would work with the beginner athletes. However, the novice coaches, what they don't know can fuck the beginners for the rest of their journey if they do things wrong, depending on the psychology, depending on the student. But what ends up happening is you get a coach who doesn't know the process. So you need to look in the future. And if a coach has only walked where they just look down on their feet instead of there, they might do certain things to their beginner athletes that build bad habits for the long term. That's something that I had from not having a coach, is I built a lot of initial bad habits, but I've seen bad coaches. I don't want to say ruin, it's kind of a harsh word, but I have seen it. I've seen bad coaches ruin the potential of amazing athletes because they didn't understand the process and they built bad habits early on or in the middle of the process that at that point it was too late to undo them given the time frame of that athlete.
Yeah, it is I think that's an additional difficulty when it comes to working with adults, is that they have a lifetime of really bad habits that they've created either through other training experiences with their coaches or just generally like their lifestyle, and the way they move and the way they even not necessarily only regarding their physical, their body, but also their mindset and the way they think about things and their approach and their it's quite interesting, the whole process.
Yeah, just seeing not only the thought process, the manifestation of that in the physical, and then this the idea of and you get that with kids sometimes too, but more so with adults, like, oh, that looks impossible. I could never do that. Why not?
Yeah.
Whoever's doing that probably looked at it and said, oh, that's cool, I want to do it. And that might have been the only difference. And I'm not trying to bullshit this, like, yeah, positivity, you can do it. But a lot of times it's like the self-sabotage where you don't even try something because you're imagining how hard it might be. And the reality is it might take you years to do it because that's the reality of any high-level skill. But walking into somewhere with that mindset of, oh, I could never do this. Well, now you can't.
Yeah.
And now even thinking that it's going to take twice as much work to undo. You might break this mental barrier where, oh, now it's possible. And I'm going to use handstands as an example, right? There's a big misconception. It doesn't take a lot of strength to hold a handstand. You have to be able to get your arms in a certain position. You can't relax fully. You do have to hold your own weight, but usually there's big part of the psychology is a lot of people walk into this handstand class and they say, oh, I could never do that. I'm not strong enough. Well, it's very rarely the case that somebody's not strong enough. Very rarely the case. It's usually that they just haven't experienced a perspective of what it is to hold themselves. And this even goes for heavier people, right? They think, oh, I need to be skinny and light. No, you don't. You just need to know how to hold yourself. And one particular technique that I use for handstands when I see someone that's scared, usually I do pretty minimal spotting. I don't like to spot too much. I like to give more verbal cues because it kind of makes the students do the work themselves. But if I get someone who's in that mindset, I'm going to muscle them up to their position. I'm going to get them into the position that they're holding themselves, and I'm just going to let go for a second. And they're going to come down. But the point is to feel that perspective like, look, you held it. You can hold it. You're obviously strong enough. So the issue isn't your strength. It's your fear. It's your mindset. It's your perspective. And if you change should you get stronger? Yes. but you think you need to get stronger. Getting stronger is going to take time.
Yeah.
That's adaptation you have to build in the body. You can't get stronger in one day. You can change your perspective in one day. You can change your mindset in one day if you experience the right sensations.
And I think that point is incredibly important, right? Because your perspective and the way you approach the craft, in whatever it is you want to accomplish, will significantly either increase the amount of time needed to eventually reach your goals, or massively decrease it and make it super fast and efficient. And I think that's something to think about when people are thinking of specifically like strength and flexibility, is like, oh, I could never be that flexible, or I could never be that strong. It's like, well, why not? And what are those like limiting factors that are kind of holding you back? So when it comes to finding the right kind of environment, or finding the right kind of coach, what would be some tips that you would give somebody, you know?
It has to, so you have to enjoy what you're doing, but you have to be challenged to a point that doesn't feed your ego. And this is very important. Like, you should get feedback from a teacher, and sometimes it should be harsh, and a lot of times it should be not what you want to hear, because what you want to hear is not going to make you better. And now there is a fine line, because some teachers like to have that power, and they're going to throw negative remarks to their students just because it makes them feel good about themselves. That's not a good place to be in either side. But if you have a teacher who's saying, oh yeah, you're doing great, walk the fuck out of there, because they're not helping you. They're just telling you, they're validating what you can already do, and you will gain nothing from that. So a teacher should give you feedback that sometimes is harsh, but it makes you think about your process. It makes you think about yourself. And the really good teaching, you're thinking about that shit after class. You're like, whoa, I didn't realize I was doing that. Now I'm going to have to change my whole approach. And now my whole perspective on that subject has shifted because of that one comment I got. And if you're doing something well, I think this is a really important note for teachers as well. There should, very rarely, and this is just my own, maybe it's the Russian in me, very rarely am I going to say, oh, this is good, and not have anything to say, because and either just always give suggestions. It could be once in a while you want to throw it out there, to bait the fish, but you don't want to throw it out willy-nilly, the compliments, because then they don't mean anything. If you're always throwing out compliments. But that being said, everyone learns differently. I don't like getting compliments. I feel like if somebody complimented what I did, it's a cop out. It's like, no, tell me the shit that I'm doing wrong. I don't want to hear that I'm doing good. I'm going to go to the next class if I hear that.
Yeah,
so I'm getting into this, being able to do something differently, right? So let's say somebody is doing something really well. You're a teacher and somebody's doing this skill, and say, okay, this is good. Now try it differently. Try a different path. So it's not only about offering feedback, because maybe the student doesn't need feedback. Maybe the student is doing it to a very high level. So then offering feedback and offering suggestions. So every time you get into the class and every time you walk out of the class, you have something to work on, whether it's learning something new, whether it's following a tangential path, whether it's improving and bettering the stuff that you can already do, making it more consistent. So being able to always leave a class learning at least one thing, that's important. So that's one thing I hate, is the overly friendly teacher, oh yeah, you're doing great, perfect. And the issue is that some people are going to walk out of there because they want the validation, because they come to a class wanting to get told that they're doing great because they think they are. And then when they get the real feedback, and sometimes it's hard. Like there is a point that you should not like your teachers, because like, whoa, they really say that? I'm not doing, and you get defensive. And that's the point that you really know, because I got told that a few times in the last few months, like, no, I'm totally not doing that. I was totally aware of it. Wait, am I really doing that? Fuck, maybe I am. Now I have to go into myself and redo the whole path that I thought I was doing.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing.
It is very, I think you see it quite a lot. Like, let's say if I started a restaurant and I was cooking food, and then I give you my food, and I'm like, hey Yudi, like you're my best friend, man. Like, what do you think about my food? And you're like, oh yeah, man, it's good. But maybe it's like not good, and it doesn't taste well or whatever. Like, I think there is a lot of people, when they're asking for feedback, they're not really seeking for feedback. They're seeking that validation. And of course you want the feedback to come from a good place. So like, if I'm asking you for critical feedback and I know that you really want me to be successful, then I know that you're coming from, even if your feedback is
Yeah,
super
that's
positive.
really important.
Yeah,
The place has to be from a teacher. I legitimately want my students to improve from what I'm telling them,
yeah,
even if it is negative. And that's yeah, like oh, this food tastes like shit. Well, that's not a good feedback. But like, okay, this is a little bit salty. I like this flavor, but it's a bit of an aftertaste. So
yeah.
then it's critical feedback that you may not have to use, but you can. And again, really interesting, because I've been taking the last few months classes that have been out of my comfort zone. And there was one moment in class where these two girls, and teacher just made them do this thing over and over, like for an hour and a half, because they couldn't get it right. And he's to the point, he's like furious, like, no, do this the same way. And then, these poor girls, and it's rough, the whole class is watching it too. And at a certain point, he said something really interesting. He's like, you may hate me right now. I'm doing this because I care, because I actually want you to get better. If I didn't care, I would say, yeah, good job, let's move on.
Yeah. And also too, like, if he didn't care as well, he probably might not even say anything. He'd just be like,
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, awesome, man. I think we're coming up close to the end of I think we're over the hour, but fantastic chat. I always love having conversation with you. You always have some very good insight, very different from the typical trainers. Even recently, I think I saw like an Instagram ad for a $25 personal training certification, and it's like the barrier to entry to become a quote unquote coach or trainer is just getting ridiculous.
Yeah, they're watering it down. It's getting bad, because they're diluting like what it means to actually having done something for years and put a lot of your life and your craft into it. And it's hopefully that's one of my goals, is to help give people that layer of vision to discern the bullshit, to
Mm,
discern like, hey, this is somebody who's actually put the work in, and his opinion is respectable, her opinion is respectable, versus this is a regurgitation. And it's a hard thing to see. It's a very fine layer of vision, but like once you get that bullshit detector,
yeah.
it helps.
So
But
you,
yeah, typically anything that promises anything in a short amount of time for a low
yeah,
amount of money, it's probably bullshit.
that should go on your Udi Marmerstein, yeah. What detector of bullshit or something like that,
Yeah.
yeah. Revealer. Okay, so how can audience members find you and follow along with any projects you're working on?
Check out my website, social media, basically email list. I try to do more of that, but it's
Mhm.
another skill I'm working on, is
Yeah,
all the email marketing stuff. So my website is yuri-mar.com. Very simple. Social media, just search my name, Yuri Marmerstein. YouTube, try to post pretty regularly. It's pretty random, so you don't know what to expect. It's not one of those pages that posts the same photo all the time. I try to mix it up a lot, whether that's a good or bad thing. It keeps it interesting for me. I've been doing, because I haven't been able to teach in person this year very much, I've been doing online classes every Saturday on different topics. So that's a way that you can learn a bit more about my approach. This upcoming Saturday is beginner introduction to hand balance. So that's like handstands for complete beginners, where to start, debunking the myths. Next Saturday, I'm at a seminar, and I don't have anything, but I just post it up as I go, and I take requests too. So it's not like I know what I'm going to do in advance. So I tell people too, if there's a specific topic you want me to cover, I'm happy to do it. You just have to tell me, because I can't predict, and I don't know what people want to do. I'm just doing random shit to keep myself interested.
yeah, and I'm for sure. I think you're enjoying the process. I think that's a big part of why you're able to keep up all this.
And it's interesting. Like I really don't like the online learning, but I've had to become a better teacher, because there's a lack of communication. And it's like, how do I overcome that? So even through, like I said before, doing stuff you don't like, even through doing this thing that I don't actually like, it's just kind of right now a means to connect with people and be able to teach while I can't travel. Um, I'm still improving. I'm still using that as a means for improving my teaching and my communication. And it's okay, the online stuff. It's the issue for me is the energy is lost,
Yeah.
right? It's like, so I do an hour and a half class. It ends up being about 2 hours usually because I don't think I ever finish on time. But the energy drain that I feel after that doesn't feel like 2 hours. And I think this is just my theory. It's because you don't get the energy back from the people,
Yeah.
right? It's like you project the energy into the void. And that's one of the things that's kind of, I guess, the main thing I don't like about the whole online coaching medium, the online teaching medium. And which for me, I'm doing one class a week. I can't imagine what high school teachers are doing on Zoom right now. Like, it's very tiring for me.
Yeah.
And when you do a group class, assuming they're participating, some groups are a little bit dead and it's kind of the same energy into the void, but you get the energy back from the participants. And it's really interesting, like, comparison. If I do a good group class, I'm tired, of course, it takes a lot of energy, but I'm
Yeah.
still kind of buzzed at the end of it because I'm thinking of the stuff that happened, because there was a circulation of energy. But with the Zoom classes, it ends up being, I give the energy and people get it, but there's no circulation. It doesn't come back.
Yeah. That's kind of,
But that being said, pretty big tangent. I do teach online classes mostly every Saturday.
yeah.
Stop on by. It's pretty personal. I keep the numbers small so you can ask specific questions. You can get specific feedback. Pretty low price. I do videos as well. So if you take the class, you get a video so you can go back to it later.
Awesome. Thanks, brother. Well, I very much appreciate having you come on. Always love chatting with you.
Yep.
For everybody that has had a chance to listen to this conversation, thank you for joining the Strength and Flexibility Summit. And we'll see you at the other talks. And you'll definitely, when we post all of this, we'll have all the information there to be able to follow along with what Yudi is doing. Thank you again, brother.
Yep. Thank you. Appreciate it.